What's up, everybody? Ian O'Neill and my man Spencer Kyte is back for the UFC Edmonton Preview. We're together. We're here on location in the Westin Hotel. The location of the media day yesterday. The weigh-ins will take place here as well. A brisk morning here in Edmonton, and really excited for this fight card ahead. Spencer, obviously, Amir Albazi, Brandon Moreno is your headliner. We've got Namajunas versus Erin Blanchfield as your co-main event, and a pretty stacked card overall here in Edmonton. Lots of really, really good matchups, and as fight night goes, this is a pretty damn good one.
Yeah, this is a terrific card. It's been that way since it was first announced. When even before Brandon Moreno and Amir Albazi came on, Namajunas versus Erin Blanchfield was a great fight. We now get it as a 5-round co-main event, which is always good to see. Derek Lewis, who has headlined, I think prior to this, his last 8 fight night appearances has all been main events. So now he's in the 3 spot. We've got 9 Canadians, a bunch of important fights up and down the fight card. It should be great, and I get to do it here with you.
Yeah, it's fantastic to be here. I want to talk about the main event because it is a fascinating matchup. Amir Albazi and Brandon Moreno. Moreno spoke yesterday about, giving himself a little bit of a layoff here. I mean, not much of a layoff, really, if we're being honest. He fought in February. He's back here again in November. But, I mean, in Brandon Moreno terms, I think it is a long layoff.
Yeah, for Brandon, it's a long layoff. He had fought, I think it was 8 times between the first fight with Brandon Royval and then the Mexico City fight with Brandon Royval. 7 of those were championship fights, the last 7 of which were all main events. I think 6 were championship fights. The last 7 were all main events. And so he just talked about, as you said, both when we got to talk to him on Tuesday and yesterday at Media Day, it was just too much. It was almost like he didn't want to say that he was burnt out, but he was feeling pretty burnt out when there's all those expectations as the first Mexican-born champion, as somebody that's in all of those main events, and then compounded with his broadcast responsibilities and things that he does as well. He just needed some time. I'm sure the fact that it was consecutive split decision losses in fights where he felt like he had done enough to win probably contributed to things as well. But he's also said, this break that I took was enough of a break for me. I'm hungry, I'm ready, I'm back, I'm focused. I can't get back here soon enough. And he's coming into a really important fight, so it should be fun on Saturday.
Super important fight, and it's a super important fight for Amir Albazi as well. I mean, coming off of his own health scares, he talked about, having some heart issues yesterday at the media day, temporary paralysis of his left arm and everything like that. Pretty serious stuff. But he's responded. He's bounced back, and said he had to kind of get surgery through his neck. It sounded pretty nasty what he was going through, and I mean, it's going to be interesting to see how he performs on Saturday night at the big stage and against a tough guy. For me, with Amir, he's going to have to be able to match the pace of Moreno on Saturday night, and I'm very curious to see how he can do that.
Yeah, this is a huge fight for him. Obviously, they were supposed to fight in Mexico City earlier this year. He had to withdraw to get the neck surgery. That was the paralysis bit. And then he told us that before that, he had heart surgery. And so when you're coming back from 2 things like that, of that magnitude, of that size, just that alone makes you stop and pause and go, okay, what's this mean? Where are you at? How are you physically? All of those things. He said everything is great. He said he's been chomping at the bit since kind of the midsummer when he got the okay to return and start ramping up the energy and the effort in the gym, that he's been looking forward to this. It's a huge moment. The last time he fought was the Kyte France fight. A lot of people felt that he lost that fight. He won by split decision, obviously, to put himself at number 3 in the division. But this is now the one where it's sort of like, okay, let's just see officially for sure, are you a contender? Are you a guy that is going to be waiting in the wings for the winner of the Alexandre Pantoja-Kaya Sakura fight? Are you going to be the next in line? Or are you going to be somebody that got real close but couldn't get over that sort of championship tier of fighter, which we know Brandon Moreno is? So big night in terms of both getting back and his health, but also in terms of your chance to perform at the highest level in a fight where it does really feel like it has. UFC's never going to guarantee anything. Brandon Royval would certainly have some objections to the winner of this getting the next shot, given what he's done. But it feels like it, at the very least, carries championship conversations. And so it'd be cool to see how this one plays out.
Yeah, obviously Pantoja versus Kai Asakura coming up as well. But, a couple of questions about that. Didn't seem to be too much pushback on that, Asakura coming in and obviously with Pantoja being the champion there as well. It'll be very interesting to see what does happen. The fight itself, Spencer, I mean, speed advantage, I believe, was probably going to go to Brandon Moreno. I think we got the strength and the power advantage here for Amir Albazi. I'm very curious to see how the grappling exchanges go in this fight, because I think that's going to be the definition of who's going to get their hand raised at the end of it. How do you kind of see the fight playing out between these two guys?
To me, it feels like a fight that if it's technical, it favors Amir Albazi. If he can keep it clean, if he can keep it, fundamentally sound in the striking and in the grappling department, then I think it favors him. If it gets a little messy, if it gets a little wild, if it turns into a little bit of a brawl, we know Brandon Moreno thrives in those situations, both standing and on the ground. Terrific scrambler, terrific grappler. For me, that's the swing point. Whoever goes out there and is able to just say, I need you to come over here to where I want to do this and dictate that over 5 rounds if we get there, has the advantage. If Amir Albazi can come out and just make it 1-2s and clean striking on the outside and not a brawl, I think he has a very good chance. He's fundamentally sound everywhere, has good conditioning. We saw that in the Kai Kara-France fight. He has that opportunity. But Brandon Moreno, and you talked to him about it yesterday at Media Day, we didn't see it in Mexico City, but historically he is a guy that in rounds 4 and 5, when things start getting tight and you're 2-1 down or 2-1 up and need to salt it away, he's able to dig that out and pull that dog out of himself and drag you into where he wants to go. If he can do that with Amir Albazi, I think he certainly wins this fight and gets back in the win column and gets moving forward again. But it's all going to hinge to me on which one of them is able to just force the other to play their game.
Yeah, indeed. Very, very good fight. Really can't wait for that one. As I can't wait for Rose Namajunas versus Erin Blanchfield as well. Look at, obviously, Erin is coming back off of her first loss, Manon Fiorot. Rose looking impressive and kind of settling into herself, I think, at the 125-pound division. She spoke yesterday at the media day about that transition and, it taking time, carrying more weight. We've talked about this time and time again about fighters who are moving up. You have to allow yourself the right amount of time to make that full adjustment. We talk about sometimes moving down in weight, but I feel it's just as important here for Rose, and she's found herself. She's at peace, is what she said yesterday, and is very, very confident heading into this one against what could be a very tricky matchup on paper, at least, against Erin Blanchfield.
Yeah, it's a really interesting fight to me. I was at Rose's fight in Denver, obviously, against Tracy Cortez. That came together short notice, was supposed to be Macy Barber. I thought she looked good, not quite very good. She handled herself well, same as the Amanda Hebos fight earlier this year. She went out and beat people that she was supposed to beat, that you knew on paper when you looked at it, you broke it down, things play into Rose's favor. She executed well. She did that. I think she swept the scorecards against Tracy Cortez, did the same against Amanda Hebos. Erin Blanchfield feels like a little bit more of a test, feels a little closer to Manon Fiorot, who she fought in her debut, versus that Tracy Cortez, Amanda Hebos group. And so for me, this is a chance to get some answers on both sides, because as you said, Erin Blanchfield coming off the loss to Manon Fiorot, her first loss in the UFC, was a big opportunity, fighting close to home in Atlantic City, and it didn't go her way. She said all the right things this week about, I felt good in there, Manon's obviously a big, strong, physical, whatever, I've got to make some changes. Now you get a chance to go in there with a 2-time strawweight champion, somebody who's so established, not just in this division, but in the sport as a whole, and show us the adjustments you've made. Show us that you're that elite level talent, and that maybe a year from now, we look back and we go, okay, losing to Manon Fiorot is not that bad because Manon Fiorot is the champion now, or probably going to fight for the title at the very least, not making any early predictions on that fight.
Breaking news.
Probably going to fight for the title. We don't know for sure. Don't quote me on anything. Don't aggregate me. But to me, it's one of those fights that it feels like we're sort of looking at it from a Rose perspective of like, this is Rose's chance to cement herself back in the championship mix and get herself still moving forward in that. And I think there's some questions still about, like, can she hang at that absolute elite level in this division? Like, I think she's terrific. She's looked great. We know fundamentally in terms of skills, she has all the weapons to beat Erin Blanchfield on Saturday and probably make it look easy, just with her striking, with her footwork, with her movement. But Erin Blanchfield is a dog, and she looks forward to 5-round fights. I've talked to her about it before. It favors her to be in these longer fights. We saw it in the Tyler Santos fight. Lost the first round, made her adjustments, came back 1, 2, and 3, and would have continued running away with it. And so I want to see on both sides, can Erin Blanchfield step up and be at that Rose Namajunas level? And is Rose Namajunas still at that level that we think she is?
It's going to be very interesting. Look, obviously we talked about the physical nature of moving up to 125, but it's also and something that I asked Rose yesterday was, the mental side of things as well, which she has kind of focused on and she's struggled with and self-admittedly struggled with, being at the top, having the target on your back as a champion. And, I kind of asked, how is she preparing herself, because, she's well en route of fast-tracking her way towards another title shot as well in the 125-pound division. And it's kind of a thing, where Erin Blanchfield maybe can go in and take this away from her if things go her way. Like, obviously, if you're to break down the fight, you're given, I would imagine, the striking advantage to Rose Namajunas. You'd probably give even though Rose is a good grappler, I think, the strength and the power of Erin Blanchfield and her grappling, I think, might be the key for her to get her hand raised on Saturday night.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's going to be interesting to see. We talk about Rose Namajunas throughout her career, right? We know her. She came through the Ultimate Fighter, hitting submissions. Even before that in Invicta, her first calling card was that flying triangle. But it's one of those things that if Erin Blanchfield gets on top of you and gets you to the canvas, you better be super active in trying to get back up or have a lot of attacks off your back, because she is going to work and work and work, as we saw in New York City with Molly McCann, as we've seen throughout her career. And so you mentioned that focus bit, you mentioned that mental side of things. Rose does seem more locked in and more at peace, which is a very good way of putting it, with where she's at in her career. It's one of the things I talked to her about this week and throughout this year, because it's her third fight. It's the first time since her debut year as a professional, fighting 3 times in a year, and asked her what was up with that. Like, we've had an uptick in appearances this year. What are we doing? And she was like, I just feel good. Like, I'm happy. I'm comfortable. Made a bunch of changes in life, got a bunch of stuff figured out. And so it's going to be interesting to see if she can just continue this momentum. 4th fight in 14 months, huge opportunity on both sides, and it should be a really good fight. Yeah,
great co-main event there. Really looking forward to that as well. Moving on to the heavyweight division, you talked about technique. And, I had a good exchange with Derek Lewis yesterday when I did call him a technical fighter.
Yeah, he is technical at times, and Derek Lewis became your new best friend.
Absolutely, yeah. He's going in there against Jonathan Denise. And talking about technical strikers, that's what Denise is, coming in off his kickboxing career. I asked him yesterday, how much inspiration he's taken from his fellow countryman Alex Pereira and his rise up through the UFC, and he takes a lot. He's coming in here undefeated, 8-0. We've seen him in the UFC already. For anyone who doesn't know Jonathan Denise, Spencer, what can you tell the people who are watching about him?
I mean, you already touched on it, right? It is the technical kickboxing. He comes from fighting in Glory and Super Combat and things like that. Certainly didn't achieve the success that a guy like Alex Pereira did under those banners, but was a very good, I think he was 22-7 as a kickboxer. He's transitioned well. It's only been a couple of years since he made the move to MMA, but he's undefeated. And I know people often say, oh yeah, but who did he fight and who did he beat? This is a sport where if you can get to 7-0, 8-0, I don't care who you fought. Like, unless you're fighting absolute novices, then we can talk about it. But he went out on the Contender Series, beat a highly regarded guy in Eduardo Neves, came in his debut and knocked out Austin Lane, came out last time and got a decision win over Carl Williams, who was on a good little run in the UFC. Again, a green fighter, an inexperienced fighter, but a guy that had put together 3 or 4 wins in the UFC. And if you can beat somebody that has 3 or 4 wins in the UFC, that tells me a little something. He is fundamentally sound. It was good to see in that last fight that he can go 15 minutes. He talked about it a little bit yesterday at Media Day of like, it's important for me to know that. Previously, I getting out of there in the first round, which is what everybody wants to do. But it's good for him to go through that and experience that as a young fighter. The fundamental kickboxing is always going to be there. I think he mixes up his weapons and he mixes up his levels extremely well, which is going to be an important thing against Derek Lewis, who is going to come out and stand in front of you and swang and bang and look for your head.
Indeed, it is. Like, I mean, we're all talking about Denise's early stages of his UFC career. Not the case for Derek Lewis. 30 fights in the UFC, crazy longevity in the heavyweight division as well. He's been in there with some of the best fighters, but, if he doesn't play his cards right on Saturday night, he's going to have his hands full with this guy.
Yeah, this is a tricky fight, and this is a spot that Derek has been in myriad times. It's very similar to what he was dealing with last time as a main event in St. Louis against Rodrigo Nascimento, who is on this card as well. He's familiar in this spot, and it sort of always feels to me, in having covered Derek's career, these whole 30 fights and talked to him a bunch, it's just mindset. It's just focus and attention. Where is he at when he gets out there? Does he respect the guy that's across the cage from him? Is he ready to go? And he seems in good spirits this week. He looks like he's in great shape. We haven't obviously seen him on the scale yet, and Derek Lewis is always and forever going to be a gigantic human being, but he looks to be in really good shape. He looks to be in really good spirits, had that great interaction with you yesterday. And so it lends me to thinking that we're getting the best version of Derek Lewis. We're getting that version we saw in St. Louis, or that we saw in Salt Lake City last summer against Marcos Rogerio de Lima, where he came out and hit the flying knee and things like that. I think we're going to get that guy, and not the guy that kind of at times seems apathetic about being here. I think he's locked in. I think he likes being in this spot where the main event pressure isn't on him, all the media spotlight isn't on him, and he gets to just face a guy that has never been in there with someone like him. Derek will never say it. He will never be the guy that comes out and says, look, these people need to respect me. I've done this. Look at what I've accomplished. But there's surely a little bit of that pride there of like, I got 30 fights in the UFC. I have the most knockouts in UFC history. I fought for gold twice. This dude's got 2 fights in the UFC. I think we see him prove a point on Saturday again.
Yeah, very exciting fight in heavyweight division, and it was good to see Derek in good form yesterday at the media day as well. In the 205-pound division, Cal Machado versus Brenson
Ribeiro.
Yeah, Brenson Ribeiro. That's just
easy for me to say.
Yeah, for sure. Talk to me briefly about this fight.
I mean, you hate to say it right, but this is a must-win for both guys. Kyle Machado, moving down from heavyweight, had previously competed in the heavyweight division in the UFC, lost a couple of tepid decisions, low output fights. He is a former BFL champ out in Vancouver, where I'm from. This has always been the right weight class for him. I talked to him when he was coming up in BFL, and he was like, yeah, I could fight at 205, but like, why do I want to cut if I don't have to? And 100% I'm with you. If you can show up at 235 or 240 without ever sacrificing any food or enjoyment of life and still win fights and make it to this level, do you? But now this is back against the wall, because the last couple fights have been not great in terms of just output and optics. I know he's felt he's won both of those fights and that they were close fights, and they were, but they were close fights because nobody was throwing anything. And so now you get a chance to go out there against a guy in Brenson Ribeiro, who has lost his first 2 UFC fights as well, after getting a surprise win, an upset win on the Contender Series to earn his contract. So this very much feels like one of you guys needs a win to stick around, and the other, unfortunately, is probably going back to the regional soon.
Yeah, indeed. In the middleweight division, Marc-André Barriault versus Dustin Stolfos. When I seen this, I just think these are 2 bruisers coming in here, and we're going to see, some heavy hitting. We're going to see some slugging, and I think that's a typical Marc-André Barriault fight. I seen him fight, I think, a couple in Vancouver last year as well. So maybe in Vegas, I'm not quite sure, but no, I'm always excited to see him fight. He always puts on a good show.
And this is one of those ones that anytime I write my previews, anytime I kind of set up these events that are coming up, you have the high stakes fights in the main and co-main, as Sean and Graham will always talk about, right? There's a lot of jeopardy in those first couple. Not every fight on the card can have a whole ton of jeopardy, and sometimes you just need 2 boys that are going to go out there and sling leather, and these 2 will. Dustin Stolfos hasn't had a lot of victorious success in the UFC. But he's managed to stick around, because every time his name is on the fight card, you are getting an absolute slobber knocker. He had a great fight with Punahele Soriano in Austin last year. He had a great fight with Bruno Ferreira earlier this year that ended with one of the best knockouts of the year with that spinning back elbow. And now Marc-André Barriault comes in on a 2-fight skid, looking to sort of just remind everybody, and including himself, that he's a guy that should continue to be here and does have the talent and the ability to continue to be sort of a quality mid-pack middleweight and just a veteran hand that gets in these fights. That every time we come to Canada, we know we're going to get the power bar. We know we're going to get a good fight. I'm always in for it. I know that it's a fight that a lot of people are going to be like, who cares about these guys? Sometimes we just need fun fights. Sometimes we just want to see two dudes go out there and try to beat the holy hell out of each other for 15 minutes or less. And I am always going to be here for it.
Yeah, this one definitely kind of ticks off all those boxes, Spencer. And talking about fighters who want to prove themselves and exciting fights, Mike Malott was coming in here against Trevin Giles, coming off that loss against Neil Magny in his last fight. Obviously, that was very disappointing. A fight that he was winning until he lost it. That's a simple kind of analysis on that fight. He was doing so well, kind of punctured in the third round, and that Neil Magny doing Neil Magny stuff. He comes back in here against Trevin Giles. Speaking to Malott yesterday, very focused. He has the blinkers on. I tried to draw him out and talk about maybe what fights could be on the horizon with a win here. Would you like to get the Magny fight? Wasn't having any of it. He's focused on this fight, focused on Trevin Giles, and focused on the threat that Trevin Giles will possess to him on Saturday night. But, I mean, if we're both being honest, in my opinion, I feel this is a fight that Mike Malott can go out there and get a win and get an impressive win.
Yeah, it's not quite a showcase fight. I'm never going to put that over somebody like Trevin Giles, who, as Mike has said throughout the week, you don't earn 7 victories in the UFC across 3 weight classes by being a scrub. They have grappled together against one another a couple years ago in Fury. Mike got the better of that, so that sort of buoys him a little bit going into this. The other part of it is that it's been a longer camp than he anticipated. He was supposed to fight in July and get that sour taste out of his mouth. When we talked to him on Tuesday for UFC.com, asked him just sort of like, what has the process been like? And he said, no, it wasn't bad. We do all the reassessing. He's like, but then July happens, and he clarified, and he wanted to make sure it was clear. Gilbert Urbina withdrew, and then he said, look, I'm hurt too, so maybe I shouldn't take another fight. He suffered a really bad injury, from what I understand from talking to different people around it. It's a good thing that he didn't fight, but it just meant that camp is longer and longer and longer. And so he's had to sit on that loss that, again, you tried to draw some stuff out of him about the future. I tried to draw some stuff out of him about Toronto. He's not getting into it. But these athletes, that sits heavy. That was his first opportunity to compete in the UFC at home, close to home in Toronto. It meant a lot to him, and it didn't go his way. And now he's sat for essentially 9 months stewing on that. And so you said he's got the blinkers on. He is absolutely laser focused on this. I think we see the Mike Malott that we saw in Vancouver last year when he had that big breakout performance against Adam Fugit, where he was, even though there were champions on the card, even though Charles Oliveira is on the card, you and I both said, I think on a preview here as well, Mike Malott's the star of this week. I don't know that it's been the same this week because it's a little bit, lower key. It's a fight night, not a pay-per-view. And he's not the ascendant guy right now because he's had that stumble. But I think we get back to it on Saturday if he goes out and does Mike Malott things against Trevin Giles.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, like you spoke about sitting on that loss as well. And I feel, when you are sitting on a loss and when you want to go out there too, he's going to have to tread carefully early here. He's going to really have to tread carefully and not want it too much.
Right.
But I do think, he has the ability to get the job done. And I feel, he had his guard up for the media day. I think that guard is going to come down, and if he gets the win, I'm very excited to see his post-fight media scrum with everybody on Saturday night as well. But very, very excited to see Mike Malott in there. Eamon Zabi versus Pedro Munoz. Really, really good fight here. I mean, just before we sat down here to preview, we had a brief discussion with Eamon. He's in good spirits, looking to make it 5 wins in a row. Yeah. And we kind of were having a discussion about Eamon, like kind of coming of age as a fighter, finding himself. Something has clicked for him on the last number of fights, and he spoke yesterday, and I asked him the question about, consistency over time is the key to success, and that seems to be what he has here. But he's going to have his hands full as well. Look, Pedro Munoz, a veteran in the fight game, never been finished, always a tough guy to get out of there. But I'm very curious to see how Eamon Zabi kind of solves that puzzle against the Brazilian on Saturday night.
Yeah, it's very rare, and I think I wrote this in Fighters on the Rise this week talking about Eamon. It's very rare that we see people put things together the way he has at his age. And I am 10 years older than Eamon Zahabi, so I'm not calling him old. I've known him for a long time. He will understand. But he's 37 now, and he's finally starting to put things together and string together these victories where it's it's no longer about proving that he belongs and proving that he's not getting these opportunities just because he's Faraz Zahabi's little brother. He is now full-fledged Ayman Zahabi, UFC bantamweight, on a 4-fight winning streak with an opportunity to maybe not break into the top 15, but at least get another step closer. Pedro Munoz has fallen out of the rankings in the last couple of fights, but as we talked about yesterday when Pedro was done at his media availability, that's a guy that, along with the likes of like Edson Barbosa and Rafael dos Anjos, 2 other Brazilian veterans, has just fought top 15 guys for a decade. He spoke yesterday about being in the UFC now for, this is year 11. Again, I've said it a couple times throughout this, but you don't get that kind of longevity and to stick around and to fight, constantly be the guy that is the measuring stick for some of the people that he's fought, or the big test for some of the veterans that he's been in there with, against Dominic Cruz and Frankie Edgar and all these different people, if you're not legit. And Pedro Munoz is legit. It's a big test for Ayman Zahabi. You know the weapons that are coming. You know the low kicks are coming quick. You know the jab is coming. You know if you shoot poorly, he is grabbing that neck. It is a huge opportunity for Ayman. It's a big fight. It's, for me, it's one, and a little bit selfishly because I've known him for so long, but it's one that I've been looking forward to since it was announced, because it's going to tell us so much about where Ayman is right now and going forward.
Absolutely, yeah. It's a fantastic test. Like, you know, talking about consistency over timing, and timing is everything. And I think that this fight has come at the perfect time for Ayman, and I'm really excited to see how he gets along. Well, you know, this card is the gift that keeps on giving. Another banger coming up: Ariane Lipski versus Jasmine Jasdavicius. You know, Jasmine, I can't. Maybe it was you or somebody asked you. She was the only kind of fighter, I believe, that was on the undercard that was given some media time yesterday. Speaks really, really well. You know, knows what kind of a task she has in front of her, because, you know, obviously Lipski been a bit of a mixed bag of a UFC career for her, but recently she's been looking really good. When we talked about things clicking for Ayman Zahabi, I think we can say the exact same thing about Ariane Lipski as well. And I think this one is going to be a real fast-paced kind of fight in a phone booth style fight, I would imagine.
Yeah, I think so, and it's another good test for Jazz. Obviously, she was supposed to fight Viviane Araújo in Denver back in the summer. Vivi had to pull out, replaced by Fatima Klein, who came in, stepped up on short notice, stepped up a division, and Jazz had a great performance. Everybody was thinking, oh, this hot prospect, and rightfully so, is coming in and can be dangerous, can be a threat, and Jazz just full out went out wrestled her, out hustled her the whole way, looked great. It's surprising to me that she's on the undercard here. It's surprising to me that she's not getting more attention. It's great that she got media day yesterday. She's the only ranked Canadian at the moment. She is on a nice little run of success. She's got 1 loss in her last 5 fights. That's Tracy Cortez at Noche UFC. In a competitive fight, I know she said yesterday that she felt she won that fight. Maybe not, but still a competitive fight to lose to somebody that's had the success that Tracy has had. This is, again, it feels like this is what we're having throughout this card, right? These Canadian athletes are getting the opportunity where this is the one you got to win. This is the one that's going to show us if you are ready to take that next step. Ariane Lipski, not quite at that Tracy Cortez level of success, but had some good wins prior to the loss to Karine Silva last time out. Again, if you lose to Karine Silva, that's fine. She's looked fantastic thus far. She is fighting Viviane Araújo coming up. I can't wait to see that. And so this is another moment for Jazz to come out and just prove that she's going to be continually moving forward. There's no shame in being the 13th, 14th best fighter in that division. It is a loaded division. But can you be 10? Can you be 8? Can you keep moving forward? We're going to start finding that out about Jazz on Saturday.
Yeah, very, very excited to see how that fight plays out. I want to skip down a couple of fights here now, because I've got to talk about this one. Jack Shore versus Yusuf Zalal. Whew, this fight was only added onto the card a couple of weeks ago, and I'm like, oh my goodness, this is a wonderful surprise. But I feel, you know, this is a very interesting fight in terms of we've seen Zalal come to the UFC. His initial run in the UFC didn't go too well. Lost to Ilia Topuria. No shame in that now. That loss has aged very gracefully for Zalal. But I was a big fan of his fight style. You know, a very well-rounded fighter, but you know, just didn't happen for him. Maybe it was a little bit too soon. Got cut, picked up a couple of wins, and since he's come back, he's looked sensational. But this is the true test, really, against a guy like Jack Shore, and I'm very interested to see how this fight plays out.
Yeah, stylistically, this one is fun because Yusuf wants to create scrambles. He wants to create grappling interactions. That's where Jack Shore wants to be too. Jack Shore wants to press you against the cage and just get into being tank and wrestling you to the ground and keeping you there and smothering you and battering you. He's looked good in his 2 fights since moving up to featherweight. I know the last fight is a loss, a doctor's stoppage. He got kicked in the shin a bunch of times and it opened up a big gross wound. It happens. And Joe Anderson Brito is a tough out. But he looked great in his debut against Makwan Amirkhani. This is a good matchup for him. I think you and I both and a lot of people are really high on Youssef Zalal, especially the way things have looked. He looked fantastic on short notice against Billy Q to get his first win since coming back, and then absolutely dominated Jarno Aaron's last time out. But again, as you said, as we've said throughout, this is the marker. This is the test. This is the next hurdle in front of you of a guy that is well-established. I think Jack Shore has been criminally underrated his entire career in the UFC. You obviously know better than most about the Cage Warrior days where he was undefeated for so long, won the title, came over here, remained undefeated. He's lost twice in his career. Like, this is a dude that we don't talk about enough. We got to talk to Tank earlier in the week. He's locked in, he's focused, frustrated that things went the way they did against Joe Anderson Brito with the stoppage. Understands that he's got a fun assignment on Saturday, and it's a guy that's going to want to come out and create chaos and create interactions and create striking battles and grappling battles, and just looks forward to that test. Youssef does as well. We talked to him a little bit this week. Come on.
Great fight. And did any of the guys speak to you about like how the fight came together? Like, I mean, obviously we only heard about it 3 weeks ago, but I'm sure that they must have known about it for a little bit longer, and that maybe they're just trying to find a placement. I don't know whether you have any insight to that.
No, from what I understand, it wasn't too much of trying to find a spot. It was just hey, we've got an opportunity and there's a spot in Edmonton if you guys want it. We'll throw a 14th fight on the card. Jack hasn't fought since that fight with Brito. Obviously, Youssef is always game to jump in when he can and things like that. He had mentioned that he was planning a trip to Morocco to go back and see his family. And then he got a call from his manager of like, hey, man, do you want to do Edmonton, Jack Shore? And he was like, sure, let's do it. I'll go to Morocco after that. So we get the benefit of him postponing his vacation. We get a great fight. The fans get a terrific matchup. And we get a chance. You and I were talking a little bit last night about Youssef Zalal feeling like a guy, to me, that can be a dark horse in this division, that if people aren't paying attention, he has the opportunity, he has the skills to sneak up on some people rest of this year, early into next year. This is the one I can't wait. I can't wait to see.
Brilliant fight, yeah. It's one of the fights I'm most looking forward to on the card. I'm going to rattle through a couple of fights here, and I'll get your opinion on all of them. In the heavyweight division, we have Alexander Romanov versus Rodrigo Nascimento. We have Sergey Side versus Garrett Armfield in the 135-pound division. Chad Angheller versus Cody Gibson. Good fight as well in the 135-pound division. Jamie Lynn Hort versus Ivana Petrovic is also on the card in the 125-pound division. A couple of Canadians on show there, and a pair of big-ass heavyweights as well. They're going to throw down on the prelims. What's your thoughts on all of those fights, and is there anybody that you feel we should be keeping an eye on?
I mean, the 3 bantamweight preliminary card fights to me are absolute bangers that I can't wait to see. Charles Jourdain drops down to 35 for the first time against Victor Henry. That is a terrific fight. Talked to Charles yesterday, and he said, look, making 35 properly is easier than making 45 the way he was. I won't use the exact terms that I used when I asked him about it, but he seems in great spirits. 35 always made sense for him. He was an undersized featherweight. He did well because he's game and he's athletic and he can do a bunch of really good things, and he'll capitalize on openings, as we saw with the submission win over Lando Venata and a couple other ones. But this feels like the right spot for him, so I'm looking forward to seeing that, because Victor Henry is a tremendous measuring stick. He's a guy that has been around the world competing against high-level guys, done well since getting to the UFC, well-trained, well-schooled under Josh Barnett and Eric Paulson. That's a terrific fight. Siri City and Garrett Armfield is just going to be a boxing match, and I can't wait for it. Siri's another guy from BFL that had a bunch of success out there, made his debut in Toronto at UFC 297, got busted up in the first round, and then bled all over the place while trying to come back and rally to win that fight. I thought he did enough to win it. A lot of people thought he did enough to win it, but either way, it's still on my list of fight of the year fights. Not number one or anything like that, but it'll make the top 10 for me because it was a great fight against Roman Tavares. So he's out here finally getting a chance to run it back after that debut loss. And Garrett Armfield's a guy that we know will just stand in there and box with you, no problem. And then the two 37-year-olds, as an old head, as a guy that turned 46 yesterday, to see two 37-year-olds get out there and mix it up in Chad Anheliger and Cody Gibson, both coming off good wins, both coming off arguably their best performances in the UFC. Go out there and open the show as two old dogs just getting into it. Sign me up. I'm always in.
I love it. That's it. That's our UFC Edmonton preview. Really, really excited for this card. We'll be bringing you all the interviews after the fights, obviously, on SevereMMA.com. It's been an absolute pleasure, Spence, to get to meet up with you again, break down some fights with you again. We shared a meal last night. Happy birthday. It was his birthday yesterday, so everyone wish him a happy birthday. We had a fantastic dinner, and it's a pleasure being here again. I just love it.
Great.
And looking forward to the fights on Saturday night. I hope you guys are looking forward to it too, and we'll talk to you soon.